Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations held an assembly this week focusing on the child welfare system in Saskatchewan. The FSIN say they want more control over Indigenous youth in care. APTN's Amber Bernard has more.
Child welfare legislation in Saskatchewan needs to be changed. That's the conclusion of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, and they want to form an independent committee that will address and take care of Indigenous youth in the system. The goal is to eventually take control of Indigenous child welfare in the province. They say the system doesn't care for the well-being of their children. Tim Correll, an ex-provincial government worker and current child advocate, is in full support of FSIN's decision.
There's become such a culture of non-compliance with the provincial ministry. The only way is to turn child welfare back over to the First Nations and Metis people. They need to have paramountcy in the decisions with respect to their children.
Correll says the system is fatal for children, and he's frustrated with the amount of Indigenous children dying at the hands of the government.
The system is not working. We have 30, 40 years of reports, audits that show that social services in Saskatchewan is not able to do the job. We have 15 to 20 kids dying in care every year. We have our jails loaded with children from the child welfare system, and we have this cycle. The children's children end up in child welfare.
The FSIN will move forward with the legislation reform. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Whitecap, Dakota First Nation.
Meanwhile, in the Northwest Territories, it's been a month since the Auditor General released a damning report on child welfare. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs sat down with some of those involved in the foster care system to get insight into what's not working.
Joe Boyd Alatiak is spending his last few days in Yellowknife enjoying what he loves: music. He's leaving town for Edmonton. He's done with trying to make it in the north.
Some days I'm couch surfing, some days I'm at the shelter. The weekends are the worst to stay at the shelter because nothing's open until like late morning, early afternoon.
He became homeless off and on as a teen. Having gotten kicked out of his foster home, he began drinking. But his family troubles started much earlier.
Before I was in foster care, before I got put into foster care, my mom married a guy, and he was abusive to us kids. And finally she had the strength and the will to call the cops and get him out of there. Then that's when we got taken away from her.
Alatiak was taken from Nunavut and placed into Yellowknife foster homes. He bounced around and eventually landed a good foster family, but he said he had little involvement with social workers during his time in care.
I'd say they were more helpful when I was homeless than when I was in a foster home. I would go see them every week just to check in to see how I was doing, see if I needed anything.
For this foster parent, she understands Alatiak's situation, trying to get attention from caseworkers in an overburdened system.
And I know when I had the older girls and they had appointments with the social workers, and there were times where they would get canceled at the last minute because there was an emergency that would happen. And I've had appointments that they're supposed to come to the house, and at the last minute, it's like there's an emergency.
For confidentiality reasons, we cannot identify her. But, like Alatiak, she says keeping foster kids in touch with their families from out of town is tough.
I think it's challenging for me and for the parent. Sometimes they're coming to town, but they don't know until the moment that they're coming. And so therefore there's not enough time to arrange visitation with their family members when they come to town.
And not only was Alatiak disconnected with his family.
I learned more about the natives down here more than my culture. So I know more about the culture here than up in my home.
For Alatiak, his troubles with the foster care system of the Northwest Territories mar his past. but he is hopeful as he moves out of town that they won't stake claim on his future. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
And an announcement on Indigenous Child and Family Services and the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in care is coming on Friday. The Government of Canada, Assembly of First Nations, Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, and Metis National Council will speak tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern in Ottawa. And we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptn news. Also, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous headlines. Now to the Metis National Council General Assembly in Winnipeg. As we've reported, the MNC is recommending the suspension of the Metis Nation of Ontario for grandfathering in non-Metis citizens and accepting non-Metis communities. Our Daryl Stranger has more on a new development in the story.
The motion is carried.
Wednesday at a special sitting of the Metis Nation General Assembly, a recommendation was made by Metis National Council President Clément Chartier to suspend the Metis Nation of Ontario. The reasons as to why included the MNO grandfathering in non-Metis citizens and accepting 6 Metis communities where only one was recognized by the Metis National Council. Instead of suspending the Metis Nation of Ontario, President Chartier passed a motion to instead put them on a 1-year probationary period. Today, at the final day of the General Assembly, President Chartier spoke about the probationary period and what it means.
So we're at this stage. Now it's up to the Metis Nation leadership in Ontario to comply. And if they can meet the conditions, then there's no issue. If they can't, well then, again, it's not an issue for us.
The Metis Nation of Ontario has 1 year to adopt the readmission resolutions, which include a committee of the MNC Board of Governors shall be established to organize a registry review of all MNO members, that a panel of registrars from the Western governing members working under the direction of the above committee shall conduct a registry review of existing MNO members. The MNO rescind its declaration of 6 new historic Métis communities. The Métis Nation of Ontario does not see a problem with meeting these requirements, but as President Margaret Fro explains, she is not happy with some of the allegations.
No, I'm not happy with it. I think in particular when making this kind of a decision, I would have preferred that our Assembly had all the information and had the time to be able to really consider it properly. That being said, the will of the Assembly has been that essentially the Métis Nation of Ontario is being provided with a year to provide some clarity around some of the points that they've raised.
Now, a lot has gone on at the Fort Garry Hotel here over the last couple of days. Time will tell if the Métis Nation of Ontario will be able to meet these deadlines and requirements, but they don't really have a choice as they will be suspended if they don't. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Métis National Council's gathering concluded with a series of resolutions the Council believes will help the nation-to-nation relationship with Canada. One resolution in particular will strengthen the citizenship of the Métis Nation. Ashley Branson has that story.
The Métis National Council passed a motion declaring a map of the official homeland of the Métis people. This motion began when the MNC noticed the rise of groups in eastern Canada. They say they are falsely claiming Métis rights. Will Goodon, the Minister of Housing and Property Management for the Manitoba Métis Federation, says the approval of the Homeland Map resolution is a historic moment and something that needed to be put in place.
It's been a bit of a struggle because of lots of different reasons, political, administrative, other reasons for a long, long time. But this map is something that's very, very similar to one that was developed in 1983 when the Métis National Council was first formed by the 3 Prairie Métis governments. So this is just putting something back into place so that it's very clear of where the Métis Nation is.
Earlier this week, the Métis Nation of Ontario was disciplined for accepting non-Métis people. Margaret Fro, president of the MNO, shares her thoughts on the passing of the map.
it's certainly a narrowing of the what's been recognized as the historic Métis Nation homeland, and that doesn't include, the map that has been passed doesn't include communities like the Pali community, which again is the only Métis community that's been recognized in law in Canada by the Supreme Court as being a rights-bearing Métis community.
She adds,
I think there's a lot of things that the Métis Nation of Ontario, but also the Métis Nation more broadly, need to consider in that kind of a decision. But we'll work with that, and most importantly, we'll talk with our citizens, make sure that people understand the decisions that have been made, and we will continue to move forward.
Goodon says the map is simply to assert who the Métis Nations are.
We're a distinct people that developed 200-300 years ago, and we have community ties, we have kinship ties, we have our own language, we have our own food, our own music, our own dance, our own uniforms. So there's lots of evidence for the Métis Nation to say that we are a people. There's not a lot of evidence for some of these others. So again, we're saying who we are. We're not saying that they're not somebody, or they're not a nation, or they're not a people. We're just saying they're not us.
Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Time for a quick break, but first a look at what's coming up tonight after the news.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamourant, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. It's a special edition as we're broadcasting from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. We're focusing on the Forgotten Bay scholars and their struggle for a settlement. We'll have more details about their lawsuit over abuse and loss of language and culture, plus a heartbreaking interview with a survivor. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. +3 in Halifax, +2 for Fredericton and Charlottetown. 0 with snow for Happy Valley Goose Bay, +1 with snow for Cartwright, +1 under the sun in Montreal, -6 in Chibougamau, +2 with a rain-snow mix for Toronto, 5 in rain in Sarnia and Windsor, 0 with snow for Thunder Bay, Wawa, Timmins, and Kapuskasing, -9 in Puckatawagan, -10 in Churchill, -3 for Winnipeg, -4 for Princess Harbour, Barons River, -2 in Saskatoon, Regina, and Swift Current, -4 in North Battleford, -10 in Uranium City, -3 in Meadow Lake. Welcome back. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers has issued a report which details their history of working with Indigenous communities across Canada, and the association says they have quite a bit of support from communities who want to benefit from the oil and gas industry. APTN's Chris Stewart has that story.
Clayton Blood is a general manager of Canine Resources located in the Blood Tribe in southern Alberta. He is in Calgary to meet with executives from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, who are there to release their latest report. The report states that even with low oil prices, Indigenous communities across Canada have greatly benefited from the oil industry. The Blood Tribe has been in the oil industry since 1943. Blood says the Blood Tribe averages $10 million a year from oil.
We've benefited greatly because the resources provide us with some revenues that we are not able to provide in our community. For instance, we have elders that don't necessarily have the pensions or the resources to pay for their utilities. Some of these will go to pay for the elders. We have recreational programs in our community that are not funded by other governments, so we are able to provide some activity in our community.
Good afternoon. Thank you for calling CAP. Cynthia speaking.
Tim McMillan is the president of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Their report says over 11,000 Indigenous people are employed in the industry. McMillan says he wants to see more Indigenous communities become more self-sufficient.
The communities around the oil sands have been very successful on economic self-sustainability. That we have done as an energy sector, about $4 billion worth of business with companies from almost 400 First Nations in just 2 years.
There have been many Indigenous communities that are very vocal against the oil and gas industry. Clayton Blood says that the Blood Tribe has instituted every safety precaution possible.
Is it Indigenous people against the industry? Not necessarily. And maybe there is some opposition. Even within our community, we've had some people concerned about the fracking practices in our area, but this has been done. And the science that we follow is within the Alberta regulations that says these are acceptable practices.
Blood wants to help other bands to take advantage of the revenue that can be possible. He has met with nations along proposed pipeline routes.
And we tried to meet with other First Nations along any pipeline route that may be chosen, and we try and work with them on some of the economic opportunities or equity opportunities that they may want to look at.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Calgary.
The debate over resource development and the economic benefits for First Nations continues to be a hot topic. That's why an Ottawa-based think tank hosted a panel with First Nation experts. Here's Annette Francis with that.
When it comes to resource development, Stephen Buffalo, the president of the Indian Resource Council, says there's a dire need for change.
For generations, First Nations were barred from active engagement in the natural resource sector. Colonial systems, from the Indian Act and the creation of Indian reserves to deep patterns of discrimination, ensured that our prosperity that came from our traditional territories did not reach our communities.
Buffalo represents 130 First Nations from across Canada that want the economic opportunities that oil and gas projects can bring to their communities. Buffalo says in spite of the opposition to pipelines that's been seen in media, there are First Nations in support of development. That's why he's taken part in the panel discussion hosted by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa.
You know, the fact that some of our communities need that economic development, and I think it's just important that we keep doing what we have to do. The misportrayal of information through social media, and it kind of puts a negative light to what we really want, and at the end of the day, you know, some of us are advocating in this area because it can help get our communities out of poverty. And, you know, that's, if we do it right, working together, not only with industry, but with government, I think it'll be beneficial for our communities.
Teresa Tate Day joined Buffalo in today's panel. Day is a founding member of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. The coalition was formed 3 years ago to work together to become players in the economic opportunities. Day says what's needed to push these developments along is for First Nations to begin a consultation process with each other.
I think with the support of the federal government for the establishment of a governance process, an organization, the support of Indigenous-run organizations, they work. The devolution of, like for example, the First Nations Health Authority is now run by Indigenous people. They work. Financial Management Acts, they work. So Indigenous people run organization.
According to Day in Buffalo, they'll continue to advocate for economic inclusion in resource development. They say what's also needed is a loan guarantee from the federal government to be able to buy into large development projects and the ability to set their own environmental standards. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Coming up, a look at part 2 of the APTN Investigates documentary into a dispute over Mohawk land and an update on that otter eating expensive fish in Vancouver. Here's a look at the rest of Friday's weather forecast. -5 for high level, Peace River and Fort McMurray. +2 in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. -3 in Red Deer. +9 for Vancouver and Tofino. Rain and 7 above for Campbell River. Snow and -5 in Fort Nelson, +6 under the sun for Prince Rupert, -6 in Dawson and Mayo, -7 for Whitehorse and Watson Lake. In the NWT, -13 in Yellowknife, -12 with snow in Norman Wells, 8 below in Wrigley, 23 below for Sax Harbor, -14 in Paulatuck and Fort McPherson, -14 in Baker Lake as well, 19 below with snow in Cambridge Bay, -16 for Clyde River, -25 in Resolute. Welcome back. What started as a dispute over Mohawk land in Tyandaga ended in a huge police response and multiple arrests. But as APTN Investigates reporter Trina Roach found out, that was just the beginning of a decade-long fight to uncover what really happened. Here is a preview of Part 2 of Law of Land.
This is the police. Anyone blocking the road is committing a criminal offense. Blocking the road.
Tyndaga, Mohawk Territory, April 25th, 2008.
Ma'am, stay back.
What happened in 2008 here in Tyndaga, at the Culbertson track, turned out to be an example for police of how not to manage an Indigenous protest.
Our work at Tyndaga has been very much focused on policing. But there is, of course, the underlying issue of the failure to respect and uphold the land rights.
The Mohawks wanted to stop a housing development in an area under a land claim negotiation.
If anybody's going to develop the land, it's going to be the Mohawks, because it's Mohawk land.
The blockades ended, but the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, stayed, and tensions escalated.
This is it. Justice for First Nations communities. Lock us up.
The sudden arrests would be the start of a decade-long search for answers, accountability, and healing.
Looks good. You can catch that tomorrow on APTN Investigates right after APTN National News. An update now, or lack thereof, on that otter eating the expensive fish in a Vancouver park.
All the fish look pretty good condition. We're keeping things water quality-wise as close as possible as we can to the pond they came from.
Good condition as in not eaten. The otter, 810, pricey koi up till now, but hasn't been seen for 3 days. The traps are still in place, though, as officials still want to take the hungry mammal to a new home in the eastern Fraser Valley. The Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Garden will reopen to the public tomorrow. And that's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, or download the new APTN app. Now stick around, a special edition of Nation to Nation with Todd Lamrand is next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.